That morning was bright and cheerful, with the city park buzzing with the laughter of children. Their joyful voices filled the air, creating a warm and delightful atmosphere. Colorful balloons floated in the breeze, decorating every corner of the park, while a large table overflowed with a variety of foods. At the center of the table sat an impressive birthday cake, adorned with sparkling candles waiting to be lit. Today was a special day for Rico's 10th birthday, a moment he had eagerly anticipated and prepared for over the past few weeks. Amidst the joyous scene, Pac Leon, Rico's father, a high-ranking police officer, sat quietly on a bench a bit removed from the festivities, watching the children play. Though he was accustomed to the heavy responsibilities of law enforcement, today he felt fortunate to take some time off to enjoy the company of his family and celebrate his son's happiness. He smiled as he watched Rico surrounded by his friends, the joy and excitement evident on his son's face. "Rico, it's time to open presents," shouted one of his friends with eager enthusiasm. At the sound of the call, Rico dashed toward the neatly arranged gift table. The brightly wrapped boxes and sparkling ribbons lined up, waiting to be unwrapped. Rico felt a surge of excitement in his chest, unable to contain his anticipation to discover what lay hidden behind each colorful wrapping. However, just as Rico was about to grab his first gift, the sudden sound of a car screeching to a halt in front of the park caught everyone's attention. The cheerful atmosphere quickly shifted to silence. All eyes turned toward the vehicle, curiosity piqued. A young police officer stepped out of the car with hurried strides, his face tense and filled with urgency. There was something pressing in the air. "Rico," he shouted, his voice cutting through the festive air and momentarily halting the birthday celebrations. "Come with me right now." The urgency in his tone froze Rico and his friends in their tracks, replacing the earlier joy of the party with a sense of bewilderment and growing concern. Everyone present at the party was stunned, including Rico, who stood with a gift box in his hands. His face changed to confusion, not understanding the sudden shift in situation. The other children, who had been cheering joyfully, were now silent with fear. Their parents began to whisper, trying to figure out what was happening. Mr. Leon, who had been proudly smiling from a distance, quickly stood up. His brows furrowed as he stepped forward, approaching the young policeman known as Adi. Adi was a new member of the police force, often too aggressive and reckless in carrying out his duties. Leon knew well of Adi's reputation but never imagined his subordinate would act this way. "What's going on?" Adi, Mr. Leon asked in a heavy voice, trying to maintain calm, despite feeling a rising heat in his chest. "We received a report," Sir Adi replied, his tone tense. "This child is involved in a criminal act. I have to take him." "What report?" Leon shot back, his gaze sharp. "This is my son's birthday party, and you're disrupting it without any clear basis." "Please," Sir Adi said, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm just doing my job. I have to take this child for questioning." Mrs. Lillian, Rico's mother, who had been arranging food on the table, rushed over when she heard the commotion. She saw Rico, who was starting to cry in fear, gripping his gift box tightly. Her heart felt torn seeing her innocent son humiliated in front of his friends. Lillian was a black woman who had long experienced discrimination in various forms. Even though her husband, Leon, was a high-ranking officer in the police force, she knew that her skin color often became the reason she was treated differently. And now, seeing her son treated roughly without cause, she felt there was something more at play than just a mere order. "Adi, let Rico go right now," Lillian spoke in a high voice, her eyes flashing with anger. She had witnessed countless times how black individuals were often targeted by the police without clear reasons. But this time, the victim was her own child. However, Adi seemed indifferent. Coldly, he grabbed Rico's hand, attempting to fasten handcuffs around the young boy's wrist, as if Rico's skin color provided an additional reason for Adi to treat him more harshly. The atmosphere of the party turned tense. Parents who had previously been quiet began to protest, some pulling out their phones to record the incident. The children, who had been enjoying themselves, now started to cry, witnessing Rico's fear and helplessness. Rico continued to struggle to break free from Adi's grip, but the officer didn't give him a chance. Mr. Leon stepped closer, his face flushed with anger. "Adi, let that child go. That's an order." Yet, Adi remained unmoved. His eyes locked onto Lillian with a look that was difficult to interpret, as if a sense of superiority was barely concealed behind his actions. His fear of Leon intensified, but his ego held him back from retreating. "I'm sorry, Mr. Leon, but orders from superiors are still orders. I'm just doing my job." Mr. Leon knew that Adi was under pressure. Adi had gone too far, and now he was trying to maintain his position. But Leon would not allow this to happen to his son. Lillian stood beside her husband, holding tightly to Rico's hand, which was still trembling in fear. In her mind, she felt the old wounds of discrimination she had faced as a black woman. She knew that if the situation were different, if their skin colors were not black, they would likely not be treated so harshly. Adi, Lillian said, her voice shaking, "You know this isn't just about orders, right? You're targeting my son because he's black. You're afraid because you know his father, but you're still doing this." Adi swallowed hard, stumbling over his words. There was truth in Lillian's words that pierced deeply, but he still tried to maintain his control. "I'm just doing my job, Ma, I am. This has nothing to do with that." But everyone could see, from the hateful glares directed at him, that Lillian was right. This wasn't just an ordinary arrest. There was bias, there was prejudice, and there was discrimination that had become deeply entrenched in the system. Meanwhile, Adi began to waver. The pressure from all sides made him increasingly unsure of his actions. He knew that if he continued to enforce this arrest, Leon would destroy him. But if he backed down now, the shame would never wash away. Mr. Leon noticed the doubt in Adi's eyes. He could see that his subordinate was starting to falter. "Adi, it's now or your career is over. Let that child go, or you'll spend the rest of your life without a badge." Hearing those words, Adi's hand gripping the handcuff began to tremble. He could no longer contain his fear. Reluctantly, he slowly removed the cuffs that had been fastened around Rico's wrist. Once freed, Rico immediately ran into his mother's arms, his cries growing louder. Lillian wrapped her arms tightly around her son, glaring at Adi with a look of utter hatred. The atmosphere grew increasingly chaotic as another siren suddenly blared. A patrol car stopped in front of the park. The police chief, Mr. Heru, stepped out of the vehicle with a serious expression. He approached the now crowded scene. Seeing Leon and Adi facing each other, Heru knew that the situation had spiraled out of control. "What's going on here, Mr. Heru?" asked in a loud voice, causing the crowd to step back slightly. Leon briefly explained what had happened, while Adi stood frozen in place, clearly afraid of the consequences of his actions. Mr. Heru shot a sharp glance at Adi. "Adi, do you realize what you've done? You almost ruined a child's life and your own career." Adi could only remain silent, his eyes cast down to the ground. Mr. Heru shook his head in disappointment. "Take off those handcuffs and leave before this situation escalates further." With trembling hands, Adi removed the cuffs from Rico's hands. The boy immediately ran back into his mother's embrace, who was still sobbing. Mr. Heru then fixed Adi with a piercing gaze. "You know what's going to happen tomorrow morning, right? You can forget about your position." This has gone too far. Adi swallowed hard, his face pale. He knew the threat was real. Mr. Leon, who had been standing in anger, now took a deep breath. He saw that Adi was getting what he deserved. However, the wounds in Rico's heart and his family's could not be erased so easily. "Mr. Heru, I want this investigated further," Leon said, his voice heavy. "We can't allow discrimination like this to continue within the police force." Mr. Heru nodded. "Of course, Leon. I promise there will be a thorough investigation. We must ensure that justice is upheld." After the incident, Rico's birthday party had to be cut short. The children who had once been cheerful left with confused and fearful expressions. Their parents could not stop discussing what had happened, with some vowing to take the case to the media. Rico, even though he was now at home, continued to sob in his mother's arms. Lillian tried to comfort him, but the trauma her son experienced could not be easily erased. Mr. Leon sat in the living room, his head hung low. What should have been a happy day had turned into a nightmare for his family. Yet beneath the sorrow, a growing determination took root in Leon and Lillian. They knew they had to fight against this injustice not just for Rico, but for all the children who might become the next victims. The next day, the incident gained even more traction as several human rights organizations began to speak out. They viewed this case as a symbol of the injustices faced by black citizens, particularly concerning law enforcement. Many called for a thorough investigation into the discriminatory actions within the police force. Demonstrations began to erupt, with activists and community members taking to the streets to demand justice for Rico and his family. On the other hand, the media continuously reported on the incident. Interviews with Lillian and Leon became headlines across various news outlets. Lillian shared her bitter experiences as a black woman who often faced discrimination and was looked down upon. Days passed, but the tension did not ease. Rico's birthday incident became national news, igniting a heated debate about racial discrimination in law enforcement. Chief of Police Mr. Heru was compelled to hold a press conference to quell the situation. He promised there would be a thorough and transparent investigation into the incident. At the Leon household, the atmosphere remained tense. Rico refused to leave the house. The trauma he experienced made him afraid to meet strangers. Lillian and Leon worked hard to restore their son's confidence, but they knew it was not an easy task. "Rico, you have to know that we are all fighting for you," Lillian said one night as they sat together in the living room. "What happened to you is not right, and we will not stay silent." Leon nodded in agreement. "We will make sure that no other child has to go through this. We must be brave and fight against this injustice." Chapter 11: Action and Solidarity. Human rights organizations in the local community began organizing various solidarity actions. Peaceful demonstrations were held in different cities, demanding justice for Rico and reform within the police force. Lillian and Leon were often invited to speak at these events, sharing their experiences and voicing the need for change. One of the largest demonstrations took place in front of the Central Police Station. Thousands gathered, carrying banners and posters condemning discriminatory actions. Lillian stood in front of the crowd, passionately speaking about the need for equal rights and justice. "We are all here today to ensure that no child has to go through what Rico experienced," Lillian said loudly. "We cannot allow this injustice to continue. We must unite and fight for a better future." Meanwhile, the internal investigation within the police began to show results. Adi, the young officer who arrested Rico, was suspended from his position while the investigation continued. Mr. Heru, under pressure from the public and media, had to ensure that this investigation was conducted transparently and fairly. Leon collaborated with the investigative team, providing all the information they needed. He knew that this was a crucial step in ensuring justice for his son. Lillian was also actively involved, speaking with witnesses who were present that day and gathering evidence to support their case. Amid their struggle, there were signs of change. Some police officers began showing their support for reform. They realized that the current system was unjust and needed to be changed. Mr. Heru also started to adopt a more open attitude, listening to feedback from various parties and committing to necessary changes. At home, Rico slowly began to recover from his trauma. Support from friends and family made him feel stronger. He started to return to school and play with his friends, although remnants of fear still lingered. "Everything will be all right," dear Lillian said one night as they sat together in the living room. "We are all here for you. We will get through this together." A few months later, the results of the investigation were announced. Adi was found guilty of discriminatory actions and was dismissed from his position. Mr. Heru promised to implement significant reforms within the police to ensure that incidents like this would not happen again. For the Leon family, this was a small victory amid their larger struggle. They knew that much work remained, but they felt relief that justice had finally been served. Rico, though still young, learned about the power of resistance and the importance of fighting for his rights. "This is just the beginning," Leon said one night as they celebrated their small victory. "We must continue to fight to ensure that this world becomes a better place for all of us." Lillian smiled, hugging her husband and son. "We will keep fighting. For Rico, for all of us." The future remained full of challenges, but the Leon family felt stronger than ever. They knew that their struggle had inspired many and brought about real change. Rico was growing up with a deep understanding of justice and equal rights, ready to face the world with courage and confidence. Out there, the world was also beginning to change. The voices demanding justice grew louder, and police reforms started to take place in various locations. The struggle was far from over, but a new hope had emerged. And through it all, the Leon family remained united, ready to face whatever came their way with unwavering love and determination.